BREXIT betrayal fears. Ministers signal borders will stay open for up to 5 years. Angry warnings of a Brexit betrayal were growing today after ministers signaled that Britain's borders will stay open to EU migrants for up to another 5 years. Government sources suggested that a deal had been agreed within the cabinet for a temporary implementation period following the UK's official departure from the EU in March 2019 until full national sovereignty is achieved, and Eurosceptic ministers including Michael Gove and Liam Fox indicated acceptance of the proposed transitional arrangements, which could mean EU single market rules including free movement for EU migrants staying in force until 2022. But Tory backbenchers under Brussels campaigners were alarmed that the move will effectively delay the country's freedom from the bureaucracy and keep an open door to mass migration. Senior Tory MP Peter Bone described continuing free movement for EU migrants after Brexit as unacceptable in a BBC interview. He said, "There's a complete difference between minor technical things that need to go on and major things like free movement. Free movement has to end no later than March 31, 2019, and I think most Conservative MPs would say that. The country would say that, and, absolutely the most important thing, I think Mrs May would say that." Fellow Tory backbencher Jacob Rees-Mogg feared that a post-Brexit transition period could mean continued meddling by EU judges in British affairs and restrictions on the country's ability to negotiate new trade deals with nations outside the European bloc. 5 more years of open borders will ruin this country. Leave.eu group. If we are subject to the rules of the single market and the regulations of the single market, and subject to the fiat of the European Court of Justice, we are paying for the privilege and we can't do free trade deals with the rest of the world. Then we are in the EU, Mr Rees-Mogg told BBC 2's Zeit. In the old and tired phrase, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. UKIP claimed the proposal for a transition period after leaving the EU would be a betrayal of Brexit and blamed Remain backing Chancellor Philip Hammond for the plan. Steve Crowther, the interim leader of the Brussels party, said, "Extending freedom of movement for 2, 3 or 4 years produces no obvious benefit to anyone. It is an EU principle. So ending it in 2019 or 2023 makes no difference to them. Business wants certainty, and that comes from sticking to the timetable. Negotiating robustly and introducing clear border control policies that enable us to access the skills we need. Since the election, Theresa May is badly holed and unseaworthy, and the Remainer Philip Hammond, who was on his way out of the door before June 8, now sees an opportunity to fudge, delay and obfuscate until the end of the current parliament, to try and get the decision reversed. Every time a member state has voted against the EU's wishes, they have been faced with delays and obstructions which eventually deliver the EU's desired outcome. This has happened to France, the Netherlands, Denmark, Ireland and Greece. He claimed UKIP will be back with a vengeance if the government surrender to EU bullying, and a spokesman for the Leave.eu pressure group said, "We were kidding ourselves if we thought a cabinet dominated by Remainers would respect the referendum result in its entirety." The murmurs of a possible 5-year transitional arrangement compound our fears that the Brexit the British public voted for is in danger of being subjected to an establishment stitch-up. If we are subject to the rules of the single market and European Court of Justice, and we are paying for the privilege and can't do our own trade deals with the rest of the world, we are in the European Union. 5 more years of open borders will ruin this country. It has already become barely recognizable in certain areas the London establishment elite choose to turn a blind eye to for fear of, heaven forbid, actually witnessing the devastating impact that immigration without assimilation has on ordinary people and their communities. If this government opts to pursue a policy which sees us tied to the single market for years, the democratic decision for Brexit will have been betrayed and there will be consequences. Mr. Hammond is understood to have been pressing for a transition period to give businesses a phased introduction to operating outside the EU rather than an overnight change on the 2019 departure date. He wants firms to be given time to plan for recruiting and training new staff before extra restrictions are introduced on migration from the EU. Cabinet ministers are understood to have been wrangling over the timescale and detail of the transition period, but signals from Brexit backing frontbenchers suggested that the row had been resolved. Mr. Gove, a leader of the Vote Leave movement during last year's EU referendum who has returned to the cabinet as Environment Secretary, said, "I think when it comes to an implementation period it should be driven by a pragmatic judgment about what we need in the best interests of our economy and in the best interests of guaranteeing a smooth exit from the EU, in line with the result the British people voted for just over a year ago." Pragmatism is the watchword. Pushed on whether freedom of movement would continue to apply during the implementation period, he said, "I think the judgment we need to make about future migration policy should and be shaped by what's in the interests of our economy, consistent with recognizing the instruction the British people gave us last year." International Trade Secretary Liam Fox, one of the most hardline Brexiteers in the cabinet, also indicated his readiness to accept a phased move to full sovereignty. "Having waited 43 years, another couple of years if we can get it to work well for the country and for our European partners, and we can do it for the stability of British business and for our own prosperity, that seems to me just a common sense thing to do," he told Sky News. Theresa May was understood to have stressed her backing for an implementation period when speaking with business leaders at the first of a series of quarterly Downing Street forums on Brexit on Thursday. A number 10 spokeswoman said, "The Prime Minister reiterated that the government's overarching goal is for a smooth, orderly exit culminating in a comprehensive free trade deal with the EU, with a period of implementation in order to avoid any cliff edges." Thanks for watching. Please like, share and don't forget to subscribe English News Hub for new excited videos.